to help her in the garden. Chapter 4. Colin. Mary and Dickon became great friends, so much so that she looked forward to seeing him and working together in the secret garden. But as spring came, the weather changed for the worse, and thunderstorms started to wake her in the middle of the night. She found it terribly difficult to get to sleep again, and it wasn't only the wind and rain that bothered her. She started to hear that cry again, the same cry that she had heard during the first days at the manor. So one night she decided once and for all to find whatever was making that disturbing noise. She got up and went the same way she had gone the last time she had met Mrs. Medlock. It seemed the further she went, the louder the cry became. Then, ahead of her, she saw a door with a light coming out from beneath it. She slowly walked up to it and gently pushed it open to find herself in a huge room with a big bed in the middle. On it lay a small boy. He was very pale, with huge grey eyes, seemingly too big for his small face. "Who are you? Are you a ghost?" he asked. "No, I'm not. Are you?" replied Mary. "I am Colin. And who are you?" "I'm Mary. Mr. Craven is my uncle." "And he is my father," answered the boy. "Your father? No one ever told me that he had a son. Why were you crying?" "Because I couldn't sleep, and I have a terrible headache." They began to talk. Colin told her that his father hated him, as his birth had caused the death of his mother, Mr. Craven's beloved wife. He also mentioned that he would not live to his adult age, as he would have a hunchback, just like his father, and die before long. Colin was so depressed that he didn't want anybody to see him. "Are you sure you won't live?" Mary asked sadly. "Ever since I remember people saying I won't." "But do you want to live?" "No." "Have you ever left your room?" asked Mary. "If you don't want people to see you, do you want me to go?" But Colin wanted Mary to stay and tell him all about India and herself. Mary later told him about the secret garden, that it was his mother's favourite and that it had been locked up ever since she had died. Colin asked many questions and wanted to know everything she knew about the garden. She told him many things, but didn't tell him that she had the key and often went inside. "Mr. Craven hates it, and he has hated it since the day your mother died. No one has been allowed into it for 10 years, she told him. Colin, by this stage, had already planned to make his servants look for the key and open the garden for him. This terrified Mary, so she told her cousin that keeping the garden a secret would be a lot more fun. Colin agreed with her and begged her to keep looking for the garden, and to come and see him whenever she had any news. Mary felt that her secret was safe, and talked with Colin about what she imagined the secret garden looked like, what sort of flowers grew in it, and what it was like to listen to the birds singing in the trees. "You know a lot about it already," said Colin. "It's almost as if you've been in it yourself." They were both silent for a while. "What would Mrs. Medlock do if she found me in your room?" asked Mary with a worried look. "She will tell her what I tell her to," said Colin. "I am glad you came, and will tell her to let you in. Do you know Martha?" "She will tell you when to come and see me." "I'm very sleepy now, Colin. Would you mind if I left?" "Of course. I only wish I could fall asleep before you left." So Mary took his hand and, stroking it gently, sang a lullaby in Hindustani. Colin fell fast asleep, and Mary quietly stood up and left. For the next couple of days, Mary continued her visits to her cousins, telling him about the spring in the air, Dickon, his animals, and the secret garden. The weather finally changed for the better, and that morning, instead of going to see Colin, Mary decided to go out and look for Dickon, hoping he would be working in the garden. She was right, as Dickon was there already, and had even brought his animal friends with him. There was the small fox, Captain, the black crow, Soot, and 2 squirrels, Nut and Crack. The garden had changed over the week, as the grass was greener and green buds of leaves were showing. They both worked hard, and Mary told Dickon all about Colin, his illness, and wondering what to do to try and convince him that getting some fresh air would be good for him. The work took them the whole day, and when Mary went back to the manor for dinner, she found Martha waiting to tell her that Colin was angry at her for not visiting him throughout the day. "I wish you had visited him. He had one of his tantrums. It took us the whole afternoon to keep him quiet." Mary wanted to tell Colin all the news, so she quickly went to see him. Colin was lying on his bed when Mary arrived. The first thing he asked her was why she had not visited him all day. "I was working in the garden with Dickon," she answered. "I won't allow that boy on the ground if you go and play with him instead of coming to see me." Now, although Mary had changed during her time at the manor, she was still a child who was used to being obeyed, and did not like the way that Colin was speaking to her. She got so cross with him that she decided never to see him again. Instead, she warned him that if he ever did ban Dickon from helping in the gardens, she would never speak to him again. And, as Colin himself was used to being obeyed, he least of all expected Mary to threaten him, and soon started shouting at her. "You're so selfish!" "What? You are more selfish than I am. You are the most selfish boy I have ever met." "I am not as selfish as you are. I'm ill, and I'm going to die, and all you can do is be unkind to me. I am going to die." "You're not. I don't believe you. You just say that to make people feel sorry for you." "Get out of my room!" he shouted, throwing a pillow at her. Mary was so angry when Colin threw her out of his room that she had completely forgotten the pleasant day she had spent in the secret garden with Dickon. She was so tired that she herself went to bed and quickly fell asleep. Chapter 5. More Tantrums. That night, Mary did not sleep long, and she was awoken by a noise. Before she realized what was happening, she heard screams and crying from Colin's room. He was having another tantrum. The noise, added with the impossibility of getting back to sleep, made Mary really angry. But then Colin's nurse came into her room with fear in her eyes and begged Mary to calm Colin down. Mary was surprised to see that everyone in the house seemed to be afraid of Colin. As she was a child, and as difficult as Colin herself, the nurse hoped that Mary could have some effect on the boy. Mary went with the nurse, not with the intention to comfort Colin, but simply to stop him from screaming so she could get some sleep. She opened the door with a bang and started shouting. "You stop! I hate you! Everybody hates you! I wish everybody left the house and let you scream yourself to death!" She ordered him to stop crying and threatened that she would scream too. Colin was lying in his bed. His face looked dreadful, white and red and swollen. "I can't stop," he sobbed. He was crying because he was terrified that his hunch was growing. Mary looked at his back very carefully and assured him that there was nothing he should worry about. Colin eventually stopped crying, but felt very weak. Every time he had one of these attacks, he felt very feverish and tired afterwards. "Do you think I will live to grow up?" he asked Mary. "You probably will if you do what you are told to do. You have to control your temper, though, and you have to get some fresh air. I'll go with you if Dickon pushes my chair. Then we can look for the secret garden." This helped Colin calm down, and when Mary sang him a song, he soon fell asleep. The next morning, before Mary went to the garden to work with Dickon, she went to visit Colin. She told him all about her plans to look for the garden and promised that she would share all her discoveries with him. Then later, in the garden, she spoke to Dickon about her ill cousin, asking him whether fresh air might help him. Dickon agreed, telling Mary that his own mother believed nothing to be more healthy than a dose of fresh air. There was nothing like the scent of flowers and hearing the song of birds. Mary's mind was made up. Not only would she tell Colin about the secret garden, but she would also take Dickon and his animals to visit him. "You smell like flowers and fresh things," Colin cried out joyously when Mary came into his room. "It's the wind from the moor. It blows softly and carries the spring scents on its journey." They had so much to talk about. Mary described the gardens, the colours, the plants, the trees, the flowers, the animals, and the change in seasons. "I wish I hadn't said what I did about sending Dickon away, and I won't mind him seeing me." "I'm glad you said that," Mary said, because she then knew that it was the right moment to tell Colin about the garden. She revealed everything about how she had found the key and about how the robin had shown her the way to the door hidden behind the ivy. Colin soon forgot about his tiredness and listened in excitement to every word Mary said. They made plans to take him to the garden with Dickon's help. In the meantime, Mrs. Medlock sent for a doctor to see if Colin's health remained stable after his recent hysteria. The doctor found his patient sitting on the sofa with his face beaming with joy. At that very moment, no one would have thought that he was ill, but the sight of the doctor filled him with fear. "I'm sorry to hear that you were ill last night, my boy," the doctor said. "I'm better now, much better. I'd very much like to go out and get some fresh air," answered Colin. "That's fine, but when the weather is okay, and you have to be careful not to get tired." "Fresh air won't tire me. I will go with my cousin and Dickon." "And the nurse, of course." "No, I won't need a nurse. My cousin knows how to take care of me. My chair will be pushed by Dickon. He's a very strong boy." The doctor was surprised by this strange behaviour, as Colin had always hated going out, for fear of being stared at by others. But at the mention of Dickon, the doctor stopped worrying, as he knew that he was a trustworthy and careful boy, and would never put Colin in danger. "But you have to remember," he started, but was immediately interrupted. "I don't have to remember. In fact, remembering only brings me pain. I would rather be with my cousin, as she helps me to forget. I feel better when I'm with her." The doctor left, quite relieved to see the boy looking so well, and acting like a normal child. And Colin, well, he had never felt better. He fell asleep with a smile on his face and slept more peacefully than he had ever done before. When he awoke the following morning, he waited for Mary to come and see him. She ran into his room shouting, "It's so beautiful! You've never seen anything quite that beautiful before. It has come! Spring has come! Dickon said so." "Has it? Open the window!" Mary cried, and ran to open it. "Breathe the fresh air." When breakfast was served, Colin told his servant, "A boy with animals is coming to see me this morning. I want them brought up here as soon as they come. You can tell Martha to bring them. The boy is her brother." A few minutes later, they heard the strangest sound. It was Dickon with his crow, his lamb, his squirrels, and his fox. Colin stared at them in amazement and delight, and Dickon let Colin play with them. For the next few days, Dickon regularly came to talk to Mary and Colin. As it was still slightly windy, Colin had to stay in, but patiently waited for his chance to see the new world around him. He certainly wasn't going to spoil it by having another tantrum. Chapter 6. Magic. The day finally came when it was warm enough for Colin to go out. And so, with joy in his eyes, he prepared himself for his adventure. Not only was his carriage waiting, but Mary and Dickon waited for the servants to take Colin out into the courtyard. Colin didn't let anyone follow him, for fear that the secret garden would be found. When everything was ready, Colin said, "I can't stop thinking about what it will look like." "What, the garden?" "Springtime. I'd never seen one before. In fact, I'd never really thought about it." They moved slowly, Dickon pushing Colin's wheelchair and Mary walking beside them. When Colin reached the open, he lifted his face to the sky and began looking around at everything that surrounded them. When they reached the wall covered with ivy, Mary again told them about the discovery of the hidden door to the garden. Colin was wheeled through and came out on the other side. His face by this stage had already become pink with anticipation. He looked alive and well. "I shall get well. I shall get well. Mary and Dickon, I shall get better, and I will live for ever and ever and ever," he shouted. It was then that he saw spring for the first time. Why, he thought, was it that spring had never been more than just a word? The word itself now came alive with the full force of the blossom found around him. He wanted to live it fully and would not let go. They drew his wheelchair under the plum tree, and while Colin sat there admiring the garden, Mary and Dickon worked. "I wonder if Robin will come," said Colin, noticing an old tree not far from where he sat. "That's a very old tree," he said, pointing at it. "Has it died? It looks as if a big branch has been broken off. I wonder what happened to it." Mary looked at him, not knowing what to say. "Look at Robin! There he is! There he is!" shouted Dickon, trying to direct Colin's attention somewhere else. How could he ever be told what happened to the old tree? "It was magic that sent Robin," Mary later assured Dickon. "We couldn't ever tell him how it broke, poor boy," said Dickon. Later that afternoon, they saw Robin looking for food, and soon got hungry themselves. So Colin asked Mary if she could tell the servants to prepare something for them, but bring it only as far as the path which led to the secret garden. They ate hungrily, and when they finished, they lay on the grass chatting. "I don't want this afternoon to end," said Colin. "I'm going to come back here tomorrow, and the day after, and the day after that. I want to see life grow around me, and I want to grow here myself." "Why don't you walk around?" suggested Dickon. "Walk? Me? Sure, why not? You have legs, don't you? Just like other people. But they are so thin and weak, I'm afraid to try and stand on them." "You stand on them when you stop being afraid," said Dickon. Colin was thinking about something when he suddenly spotted somebody and shouted, "Who's that man?" Mary and Dickon rose to their feet immediately. "Man?" They both seemed surprised. "Look, just look." There was Ben's face, watching them over the garden wall from the top of a ladder. He didn't look at all pleased to find them in the secret garden. Mary approached him. "It was Robin who showed us the way." At the sight of Colin, Ben's face changed. "Do you know who I am?" Colin asked him. Ben couldn't stop staring at him. He was an old, tactless man, and knew only the things he was told. So he answered, "Who are you? You have your mother's eyes, but you are a poor cripple." "I am not a cripple," Colin said, anger rising within him. "He is not a cripple," Mary echoed. "Don't you have a crooked back?" His voice started to shake. "No," Colin shouted. "Don't you have crooked legs?" This was too much for Colin. His anger and insulted pride filled him with such a force he never thought he had. "Right!" he shouted, moving as if to stand up. Dickon and Mary came closer to his chair, and Dickon, holding his arm, helped him stand straight. "Look at me! Just look at me! He's as straight as I am, as straight as any boy in Yorkshire," Dickon shouted. While Mary watched, she started saying to herself, "You can do it, you can do it." She believed it was magic doing it, making Colin stand and feel a will to live. And then finally she looked up at Ben. He was crying. He couldn't take his eyes off Colin standing upright. "People tell lies," Ben said. "You'll be a fine man one day. God bless you." Ben's head vanished behind the wall, and he came into the garden through the gate. "Look at me. Do I have crooked legs? Everyone thought I was going to die. I'm not." "What do you do in the garden?" Colin asked Ben. "Anything I'm told to do. I work here because your mother likes me." "My mother? It was her garden, right?" "Yes, she was very fond of it. Now it is my garden, and I am very fond of it. I shall come here every day, but it is to remain a secret. I shall send for you sometimes to help with the work in the garden." "I've come here before when no one was looking." "What?" the three children shouted. "She was so fond of her roses. She said to me once, 'Ben, if I am ever ill, or if I ever go away, would you take care of my roses?' When she died, your father ordered that no one be allowed to come here, but I did, over the wall, on the ladder." "I'm glad you did," Colin said. "You know how to keep a secret." From that day on, Colin visited the secret garden every day to practice walking and to breathe the fresh air. He became rounder and stronger and began to look just like an average healthy young boy. Despite this, though, his doctor started to worry about him. "You shouldn't stay out that long. You shouldn't tire yourself too much," he warned. "I'm not tired. It has made me well. I am going out in the mornings and in the afternoons. It would be stupid to stop me," said Colin seriously. "You shouldn't be so rude," said Mary, who was listening in on the conversation. And looking at Colin's face, she added, "But don't worry. I too was rude. But the time will come when you will feel others in your life, and how much their lives become part of you. You too will feel the magic of the garden." "I don't want to be rude. I shall stop being unfriendly if I go to the garden every day. There is magic, a good magic there." Chapter 7. In the Secret Garden. Then it was magic, as they called it. The wonderful things that happened in the garden. The green things began to show buds, and then the buds began to show colours, blue, red, purple, yellow, and the roses, light, fresh leaves, and the buds, tiny buds. Colin saw it all, watching every change that took place there. He liked lying on the grass, watching things grow, but more determined still, he kept practicing to walk. Days passed. Colin spent as much time as he could in the garden. His appetite improved. To the great surprise of his nurse and Mrs. Medlock, Colin, together with Mary, ate twice as much as they used to before. Although Colin put his newfound appetite down to the fresh air, his nurse decided to contact his doctor to examine Colin on this matter. "You are not feverish, and what extra weight you have gained is healthy. If you keep this up, my boy, we need not talk of dying. Your father will be happy to hear of this remarkable improvement." "I won't have him told. It will only disappoint him if I get worse again. And I might get worse this very night. I might have a terrible fever. I won't have letters written to my father. You are making me angry, and you know that it is bad for me. I feel hot already." "Hush, my boy, hush, hush. Nothing shall be done without your approval." The children, afraid that their secret might be revealed, decided to eat less at the house. Instead, they gave some of their pocket money to Dickon's mother, who bought and prepared extra food for them. In this way, they stopped eating so much at home and sent their meals hardly touched back to the kitchen. The doctor was called again. "I am sorry to hear that you do not eat anything. That will not do. You will lose all you have gained. You ate so well not long ago." "I told you it was an unnatural appetite," answered Colin. Mary, who was sitting next to them, was about to burst out in laughter, and it sounded as if she was joking. Their strange behaviour gave the doctor the idea that they may be getting in food secretly, but none of the servants knew anything, and so he thought that it can't be true. The children spent their time in the garden, working, playing, laughing and dreaming about magic, the magic that would allow Colin to fully and finally recover. One day, while they were playing in the garden, Colin saw somebody approaching them. "Who is it?" he said quickly. The woman who had entered the garden looked at them, her face smiling brightly. When Dickon saw her, his eyes widened. "It's my mother!" he cried, and went across the grass to greet her. Turning to the others, he said, "I thought you'd like to meet her and to thank her for the food that she's prepared. So I told her where the secret door was hidden." Colin held out his hand to Mrs. Sowerby. "Even if I were ill, I would still want to meet you. Are you surprised I am so well?" Dear lad," she said, smiling, "I am, but you're so much like your mother that it makes my heart jump." "Do you think my father will like me?" Colin asked awkwardly. "For sure, dear lad. He must come home. Your father must come home. He must." While the secret garden was coming alive, and the two children were coming alive with it, a man wandered lonely in faraway places in the Norwegian fjords and the Swiss valleys. It was Archibald Craven, a man who had kept his mind filled with dark and heartbroken thoughts for 10 years. A terrible sadness had fallen upon him when he was at home, so he deserted it and forgot all his duties. He travelled to the most beautiful places, as well as the most peaceful ones, hoping that his heart would find happiness. One day, wandering in a valley, he sat on a lake's shore to rest and fell asleep. He had one of those dreams that seemed so real that he hardly realized it was a dream. He heard his wife calling his name, and when he called her to ask where she was, she replied that she was in the garden. When he woke up, he knew that there was only one garden his wife could have been thinking about, but the gate, or so he thought, was locked, and the key was buried somewhere in the ground. Later, when he got back to the hotel he was staying at, a servant gave him a letter that read, "Dear Sir, I am Susan Sowerby. I will make bold to speak. Please, sir, I would come home if I were you. I think that you would be glad to come, and if you excuse me, sir, I think your lady would ask you to come if she was here. Your obedient servant, Susan Sowerby." Mr. Craven read this letter many times before he put it back into its envelope. It reminded him of his dream. He decided to go home at once. In a few days he was back in Yorkshire. "I will try to look for the key," he said to himself, thinking about his dream. So, when he arrived at the manor, he asked Mrs. Medlock, "How is Master Colin?" "Well, sir, he's different." "Worse?" he feared. "You'll see, sir. He's growing very peculiar, sir. Not long after one of his worst tantrums, he insisted on being taken out every day by Miss Mary and Dickon, Susan Sowerby's boy. He stays outdoors from morning till night." "Where is Master Colin now?" Mr. Craven asked. "In garden." Mr. Craven repeated Mrs. Medlock's last words and headed towards his wife's favourite garden. He knew where the door was, but he didn't remember where the key was buried. When he got closer to the garden's walls, he heard strange noises coming from inside. This seemed to him a little strange, as he knew that the garden had been locked for 10 years. He walked up to the door, opened it, and as soon as he walked in, a tall, handsome boy ran up to him with his arms open. Mr. Craven was speechless as the boy hugged him. "Father, I'm Colin. You can't believe it, can you? I scarcely can myself. I'm Colin." Mary, who ran right after Colin, saw them and stopped, watching them carefully. "It was the garden that did it, and Mary, and Dickon. I'm well. Aren't you glad, Father? I'm going to live for ever and ever." Mr. Craven looked at him with joy in his eyes. He put his hand on the boy's shoulder and said, "Take me into the garden, my boy, and tell me all about it." It took quite a while for the story of the secret garden to be told, and of the magic that lay inside it. But it was told, all of it. "Now it seems not to be a secret any more," Colin said, finishing his story.